a billionaire who believed money could fix everything, until he learned that some things can't be bought. He had fired 7 nannies for not being good enough to handle his autistic daughter. But everything changed the night he found his little girl singing with the maid. What he discovered that night shook him to his core. Welcome to Stories Hub. Make sure you like and subscribe for your top-notch stories. Let us know in the comments section where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video. Jonathan Reed was a man everyone in Chicago knew. He owned 3 tech companies, sat on the board of 2 hospitals, and had been featured on Forbes' list of richest Americans for 5 years straight. People admired him for his business brain, but behind the gates of his mansion, Jonathan was just a single father who couldn't seem to connect with his own daughter. Her name was Grace. She was 8 years old, with dark curls and big brown eyes. Grace had been diagnosed with autism when she was 2. She barely spoke. Some days she wouldn't make eye contact at all. Jonathan loved his daughter, but he didn't understand her and he hated feeling helpless. So he did what he knew best. He hired professionals. The first nanny lasted 2 weeks. She left in tears after Grace locked herself in the pantry for 5 hours straight and refused to come out. The second nanny stayed for a month before quitting, saying the stress was too much. By the time the 7th nanny was fired, Jonathan's staff was starting to whisper behind his back. "Oh, maybe the problem isn't Grace," the housekeeper Maria muttered one night in the kitchen when she thought Jonathan had already left. He heard her, and it made his blood boil. "Are you saying I'm the problem?" he demanded, stepping into the kitchen. Maria froze, clutching a plate in her hand. "No, sir, I'm just saying maybe she needs consistency, stability, not a new face every other week." Jonathan didn't reply. He simply turned and walked out, his jaw clenched tight. But the truth was, Maria's words stuck with him. One rainy evening, Jonathan came home later than usual. The house was unusually quiet. No TV, no clattering from the kitchen, no staff walking through the hallways. He dropped his keys on the counter and was about to head upstairs when he heard something that stopped him cold. A voice. A child's voice. Grace's voice. Jonathan froze, his heart hammering in his chest. She was singing. Very softly, almost like a whisper, but it was definitely her. He hadn't heard her speak more than 3 words in a row in months, and now she was singing? He followed the sound down the hallway, past the dining room and towards the back of the house. The closer he got, the clearer it became. It wasn't just humming. It was a song. And someone was singing with her. He turned the corner and stopped dead in the doorway of the laundry room. Grace was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her tiny hands clapping along to the rhythm, and beside her, on the cold tile floor, sat the new maid, Isabella. She was singing softly, her voice low and warm, guiding Grace through each word. Jonathan didn't move. For a moment, it felt like the whole house had stopped breathing. Isabella noticed him first. She went pale, scrambling to her feet. "Mr. Reed, I'm sorry." But Jonathan lifted a hand, stopping her. His eyes were still on Grace, who kept clapping and singing, completely unaware of her father's presence. His throat tightened. He didn't know what to say. He had spent months paying the best therapists and experts money could buy, and yet this young maid had managed to do something none of them could. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice low. "How did you do that?" Isabella hesitated, then glanced down at Grace, who had stopped singing and was now looking up at her father with wide eyes. "I just listened to her," Isabella said softly, "and I sang with her." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He didn't know whether to be grateful or angry. Before we dive in deeply, let us know in the comments what country or which city you're watching this story from. We'd love to know how far this story travels. Jonathan stood in the doorway, his chest rising and falling as if he'd just run a mile. His mind raced. For months he had thrown money at the problem, expensive speech therapists, occupational therapists, private schools, all with little progress. And now this maid, who had been hired just 2 weeks ago, had somehow cracked through to Grace. "Grace," he said softly. His daughter looked up at him, blinking. She didn't speak. Jonathan crouched down, trying to steady his voice. "Were you singing?" Grace fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, then nodded slowly. Jonathan swallowed hard. It was such a small thing, a nod, but it felt monumental. Isabella shifted awkwardly by the washing machine. "She likes music," she said quietly. "When I started working here, I noticed she hummed sometimes, so I started humming back. Tonight, she let me sing with her." Jonathan's mind was spinning. He had fired 7 nannies, some of them highly qualified, because they couldn't handle Grace. And here was this 23-year-old maid who had somehow made Grace feel safe enough to sing. He stood abruptly. "Come with me," he said to Isabella. She hesitated. "Sir?" "Come," he repeated, already walking toward his study. Grace whimpered as Isabella moved to follow him. Jonathan stopped and turned. Grace had never done that before, never protested when someone left. "Stay with her," he said finally, his voice softer. "When she's asleep, come see me." Hours later, Isabella stepped into the study. Jonathan was behind his massive oak desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He gestured for her to sit. You've been working here for 2 weeks," he said. "You've managed to do something no therapist, no nanny, no professional I've ever hired could do. Tell me why." Isabella's hands twisted nervously in her lap. "Because I didn't treat her like a patient," she said. "I treated her like a kid." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He didn't like being told he had failed his daughter, but deep down he knew Isabella was right. "What do you want?" he asked suddenly. "More money? Better hours?" Her eyes widened. "I don't want anything, sir. I just care about her. She reminds me of my little brother back home. He doesn't talk much either. Music helps him open up." Jonathan was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "From now on, you answer only to me. If you need anything for Grace, you get it. No questions asked." Isabella nodded quickly. That night, Jonathan stood outside Grace's bedroom door, listening. Inside, Isabella was singing softly, while Grace hummed along. For the first time in a long time, Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next morning, the mansion was buzzing. Word had spread among the staff that Grace had been singing. The chef even left the kitchen to peek at her as she ate breakfast, amazed to hear her humming to herself. But not everyone was happy. Mrs. Dalton, the house manager, cornered Jonathan as he left for work. "Sir, if I may," she said carefully, "it is not proper for a maid to spend so much time alone with your daughter. She has other duties." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Her duty is whatever I say it is." Mrs. Dalton flushed, clearly stung. "Of course, sir." But Jonathan wasn't done. "And if anyone makes her feel unwelcome, they can find another job. Understood?" The house manager nodded stiffly and walked away. Jonathan climbed into his car, his mind still on Grace. For the first time in years, he wasn't dreading coming home after work. He was actually curious to see what progress his daughter might make today. But what he didn't know was that this fragile peace wouldn't last. Because someone in that house wasn't happy about Isabella's growing influence, and they were about to make sure Jonathan regretted ever trusting her. The next few days felt like a different life for Jonathan. Each evening when he came home, he found Grace waiting for him by the living room window, humming softly. It was new. She had never done that before. "Daddy," she whispered one evening, barely audible, as he walked in. Jonathan froze. It was the first time in years she had called him that. He knelt, feeling his chest tighten. "Yes, sweetheart." Grace smiled faintly, then ran to find Isabella. Jonathan's throat tightened. It hurt that Grace still preferred the maid to him, but for the first time, he didn't care. At least she was smiling. But the house wasn't at peace. One night after dinner, Jonathan overheard voices in the kitchen. "She's just a maid," Mrs. Dalton's sharp voice said. "It's not safe for her to have this much access to Grace." "She's the only one that girl listens to," Maria, the housekeeper, shot back. "If Mr. Reed trusts her, that should be enough." "Trust isn't the issue," Mrs. Dalton snapped. "We don't know anything about her past." Jonathan stepped into the kitchen doorway, making both women jump. "Then find out," he said coldly. Mrs. Dalton blinked. "Sir?" "You seem so worried about her," Jonathan said. Fine, run a background check, but until then, you leave her alone. Yes, sir, Mrs. Dalton murmured, her lips tight. That night, Isabella found Jonathan in the study, pacing. She's right, Isabella said quietly. Jonathan turned to her. Excuse me? She's right to be cautious. You don't know me either, Isabella said, her voice steady but nervous. But I promise you I am not here to hurt your daughter. Jonathan's stare softened. Then don't give me a reason to doubt you. The next morning, chaos erupted. Grace's favourite music box, the one Isabella used every night to calm her, was missing. The whole house was turned upside down looking for it. Grace sat on the floor of her room, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. Jonathan stormed through the halls. "Who took it?" he shouted. "Who touched her things?" No one answered. Finally, Maria found the music box outside near the trash bins. Its lid was cracked. Jonathan's face went red. He called the entire staff into the dining room. "Whoever did this," he said, his voice like ice, "is done here, fired, right now." No one confessed. But Jonathan noticed Isabella standing silently at the back, her hands trembling. Later that night, as Grace finally fell asleep, Jonathan confronted Isabella in the hallway. "You think they did this to hurt you?" he asked. Isabella nodded slowly. "Yes, someone doesn't want me here." Jonathan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Then they have a problem," he said darkly. The next day, security cameras were installed all over the house, every hallway, every entrance, every common room. Jonathan wanted to know exactly who was messing with his daughter's things. But that night, something happened that made his blood run cold. At 2 a.m., one of the cameras caught movement in Grace's room. Jonathan was jolted awake by the alert on his phone. He grabbed his robe and sprinted down the hallway, nearly knocking over a chair. When he threw open the door to Grace's room, he froze. Grace was sitting up in bed, her little face pale, her music box in her lap, the broken music box they had thrown away hours ago. And standing in the corner of the room was a shadowy figure caught like a deer in headlights. Jonathan's voice was a growl. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Jonathan's heart pounded as he stepped into the room, his fists clenched. Grace whimpered softly, clutching the music box against her chest. "Turn on the lights!" Jonathan barked. The figure didn't move. Jonathan crossed the room in 3 strides and hit the switch himself. The warm light flooded the room and the intruder's face came into view. "Mrs. Dalton." Jonathan's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "Explain yourself, now." The house manager didn't flinch. "I came to remove that thing from her room," she said flatly, pointing at the music box. Jonathan stared at her in disbelief. "At 2 a.m? Are you out of your mind?" "She's getting too attached to that Maid," Mrs. Dalton said, her voice cold. "This is unhealthy. Isabella is not trained to care for a child with special needs. She is just—" "Enough!" Jonathan roared, making Grace jump. He immediately softened his voice for his daughter. "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here." Isabella had heard the shouting and appeared at the doorway, her face pale. Jonathan turned to her. "Take Grace out of here. Stay with her in the guest room." Isabella nodded quickly, scooping Grace into her arms and rushing her down the hall. When they were gone, Jonathan turned back to Mrs. Dalton. His voice was low, dangerous. "You're fired. Pack your things and get out of my house tonight." Mrs. Dalton's expression didn't change. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was letting you stay this long," Jonathan said through clenched teeth. An hour later, Mrs. Dalton was gone, but the house felt tense, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jonathan poured himself a drink in the study, but the image of Grace sitting pale and scared on her bed kept flashing in his mind. You did the right thing," Isabella said quietly from the doorway. Jonathan looked up. "Did I?" "Yes," Isabella said. "Grace needs to feel safe here. She can't do that if the people around her are making her scared." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Thank you for staying with her tonight." Isabella gave a faint smile. "She fell asleep in my lap. She's calmer now." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jonathan realized this was the first time in months that he'd felt like he wasn't completely alone in this. The next morning, Grace surprised everyone again. She came to breakfast holding Isabella's hand, and for the first time she spoke in a full sentence. "I want pancakes," she said softly. Jonathan almost dropped his coffee mug. "Coming right up," the chef said, grinning from ear to ear. Jonathan felt something shift in him. This was progress, real progress, and he wasn't about to let anyone jeopardize it again. But Mrs. Dalton's words still echoed in his head. "You're making a mistake." That night, Jonathan stayed up late, watching the security camera feeds on his tablet. The house was quiet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. At 3 a.m., he saw movement again, this time outside, near the garage. Jonathan grabbed his phone and ran downstairs, his footsteps pounding against the hardwood floors. The night air was cold as he stepped outside, and he saw a shadow slipping toward the side gate. "So, hey!" he shouted. The figure bolted. Jonathan sprinted after them, his breath loud in the night. The figure turned the corner, heading toward the woods behind the property. Jonathan's heart hammered as he chased them through the damp grass, nearly slipping. Whoever it was moved fast, but Jonathan was fueled by pure adrenaline. Finally, the figure tripped, crashing into the dirt. Jonathan caught up, grabbing them by the arm and yanking them to their feet. It wasn't Mrs. Dalton. It was a man he had never seen before, and in the man's hand was a phone with photos of Grace on the screen. Jonathan's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" he demanded, shoving the man against the fence. The man smirked, completely unbothered, despite being caught. "Ask your maid," he said. Jonathan froze. "What did you just say?" "She knows me," the man said, grinning through the dirt on his face. "Ask Isabella who I am." Jonathan's grip tightened on the man's arm. "You're not leaving until I get answers," he growled. The man only smiled. "Then bring her out here. Bring Isabella." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He dragged the man back to the house, his phone clenched in his fist. The night staff stared as he stormed through the hallway, the intruder struggling in his grip. He threw open the guest room door. Isabella sat up instantly, startled, Grace sleeping peacefully beside her. "Get up," Jonathan said, his voice low but shaking with anger. "Now." Isabella's face went pale. "What's happening?" Jonathan yanked the stranger forward. "He says you know him." Her hands flew to her mouth. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she whispered, "Miguel." Jonathan's blood went cold. "Who is he?" Isabella's eyes glistened with tears. "My brother." Jonathan stared at her, furious and confused. "Your brother? He was sneaking around my house at 3 a.m. with pictures of my daughter on his phone. Do you have any idea how this looks?" Isabella's voice cracked. "Please let me explain. He's not dangerous." Jonathan was breathing hard, trying to keep his temper under control. "You'd better start talking." Isabella swallowed hard. "Miguel followed me here from Texas. He doesn't trust rich people. He thought you would fire me like everyone else and leave me with nothing. He just wanted to make sure I was safe. I didn't know he would come here tonight." Jonathan's stare was ice. "That still doesn't explain why he has pictures of Grace." Miguel finally spoke, his tone calm but defiant. "Because I was watching who she trusted, and I saw she only trusted my sister. If something happened to her, that little girl would lose the only person she feels safe with." The room went silent. "Sophie," Jonathan turned to Isabella, "you should have told me about him the day you started." Tears rolled down Isabella's cheeks. "I was scared you'd send me away. I needed this job. Grace needed me too." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, his heart still pounding. He looked at Grace sleeping soundly on the bed. For the first time he realized Isabella wasn't just an employee. She was the only person who had managed to reach his daughter. "Both of you downstairs," Jonathan said finally. In the living room he called security and handed Miguel over, but not before warning the guards. "No charges. Just keep him away from the property." Isabella's face was pale. "Are you firing me?" Jonathan stared at her for a long moment. No," he said finally. But things change starting tonight. No more secrets. If you want to stay here, I need to know I can trust you completely. Isabella nodded quickly, wiping her tears. You can. I promise. Jonathan exhaled, slowly draining from him. Good, because Grace needs you. And I can't do this without you. The words surprised even him. That night, as Jonathan stood in the doorway of Grace's room, he heard it again, the soft, sweet sound of her voice. She was singing. But this time, when she finished, she looked up and said, Daddy, sing with us. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed. Isabella smiled gently, starting the melody again. And for the first time, Jonathan sang with his daughter. For the first time, it felt like a family. The end. Please like and subscribe for more rich stories like this. Comment below. Let us know in the comments section where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video. Also, if you really loved this video and want to support the channel directly, you can hit that super thanks button below.